Captain Vesper Callan had always thought of herself as an optimist. Not the annoying kind with sunshine pouring out of every orifice, but the kind that thinks things can't possibly get worse and is usually right. A few light years into uncharted space, Vesper found herself staring at what could only be described as the most expensive glowstick in the universe, a wormhole temple, radiating blue light like it was auditioning for a rave. The Zephyrites were a race that looked like they'd lost a bet with evolution. All feathers and long limbs, they approached with the kind of grace only a species with no natural predators could muster. Vesper's crew had been invited here, not that they had much of a choice. The gravitational pull of curiosity was stronger than the ship's engines. "Well, isn't this just charming?" Vesper said, eyes scanning the alien architecture. "I didn't expect to spend my Thursday night in a cosmic cathedral, but here we are." Her first officer, Jax, couldn't smile if he tried. Harper stood beside her, arms crossed. "Do you think we'll be sacrificed at dawn or after brunch?" "Brunch, definitely," Vesper replied, grinning. "Aliens love a good Eggs Benedict." The Zephyrites led them inside, the corridors echoing with an unsettling hum. Vesper had expected a more welcoming committee, maybe a banner or some alien equivalent of a cheese platter. Instead, they got a solemn procession that screamed, "Welcome to your doom" in metaphorical neon. Their guide, a Zephyrite with a particularly extravagant crown of feathers, turned to address them. "Honored travelers, it is with great joy we welcome you." The joy was as convincing as a politician's smile. "Pleasure's all yours," Vesper shot back, her voice laced with enough sarcasm to fuel a small ship. "What's the occasion?" The Zephyrite's eyes gleamed like two black holes promising annihilation. "You honor us with your presence. Your kind shall become revered companions." "Companions," Jax echoed, raising an eyebrow that could cut through steel. "Like a dog," Vesper bit back a laugh. "If they think I'm fetching their slippers, they've got another thing coming." They stepped into a vast chamber, the ceiling stretching upwards like the maw of some ancient beast. An array of glyphs danced across the walls, shimmering with a light that had no obvious source. Vesper couldn't decide if it was beautiful or just plain unsettling. "Reminds me of that dive bar on Alpha Centauri," Jax muttered. "Except less vomit on the floor. And the drinks are probably better," Vesper quipped. "I'd kill for a whiskey right now." Their conversation was interrupted by a low rumble. The Zephyrites parted like an obedient sea, revealing a raised platform in the center of the room. On it stood a throne, and sitting on that throne was what could only be described as the universe's most flamboyant peacock. "Welcome, dear humans," the throne occupant boomed, voice reverberating through the air like a bad rock anthem. "I am Zephyrin, keeper of the wormhole, and I offer you the highest honor in our culture." "Let me guess," Vesper said, hands on her hips. "You want us to be your pets?" Zephyrin's brow furrowed slightly, the equivalent of a cosmic frown. "You misunderstand, Captain Callan. You are to be revered, symbols of prestige in our society." Vesper turned to Jax, her smirk widening. "You hear that? We're not just pets, we're trophy husbands." Jax shrugged. "I guess I'll need a manicure." Unfazed by their banter, Zephyrin continued, "Our people will honor your presence, and you shall live in comfort, wanting for nothing. Except freedom," Vesper added, the humor in her voice replaced by a sharp edge. Zephyrin waved a dismissive hand. "Freedom is a relative concept. Here you will have everything." "Everything except the ability to leave," Jax said dryly. Vesper sighed, her optimism waning faster than a politician's promise. "Look, Zephyrin, we didn't come all this way to play house in an alien zoo. We've got a universe to explore, and this wasn't exactly on our itinerary." Zephyrin rose from the throne, his feathers bristling with an aura of authority. "You will stay," he declared, "and you will become part of our legacy." "Sounds delightful," Vesper deadpanned. "But I've got a better idea. How about no?" The Zephyrites around them tensed, their eyes narrowing like lasers targeting an impending threat. Vesper had always been good at reading a room, and this one screamed trouble. "Captain, perhaps we should consider their offer," Jax suggested, his tone more pragmatic than submissive. Vesper knew what he meant. buy time, gather intel, plot an escape. But the thought of being paraded around like a prized poodle didn't sit well with her. "Fine," she conceded, forcing a smile. "We'll consider it." Zephyr's expression softened, if only slightly. "Wise choice, Captain." Vesper turned on her heel, whispering to Jax, "Get the crew ready. We're not staying longer than it takes to find the exit." Jax nodded, his face set in a grim mask. "Roger that." As they were led to their quarters, lavish by anyone's standards, Vesper couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a cosmic joke, one where the punchline promised to be anything but funny. The room was spacious, filled with objects that looked valuable enough to fund a small war or a large wedding. Vesper plopped onto a plush seat, letting out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Talk about a gilded cage," she muttered. Jax leaned against a wall, arms still crossed. "I've seen worse. At least there are no bars." "Yet," Vesper replied, rubbing her temples. "What do you think, Jax? Is this another fine mess I've gotten us into?" He considered the question, his expression unreadable. "Could be worse. We could be dinner." Vesper snorted. "True, but I'd still prefer to be the one with the fork." They sat in silence, the weight of their predicament settling like a storm cloud overhead. Vesper knew they couldn't trust the Zephyrites, but she also knew that leaving this place wouldn't be as simple as walking out the front door. A chime echoed through the room, and a holographic screen blinked to life, displaying a countdown. Each digit ticked away with a foreboding certainty. "Well, that doesn't look ominous at all," Jax commented, staring at the numbers with the same disdain he reserved for bureaucratic paperwork. Vesper stood, determined. "We've got 48 hours to figure this out." Jax nodded, straightening. "I'll rally the crew." "Good," Vesper said, eyes fixed on the countdown. "Because I'll be damned if I let some feathered aristocrat decide my fate." As Jax left the room, Vesper took one last look around, committing every detail to memory. She had a feeling they wouldn't get a second chance. "Time to pull a Houdini," she murmured, the words a promise to herself more than anything. The clock was ticking, and Vesper Callan wasn't about to become anyone's trophy. The countdown clock glared at Vesper like a condescending teacher, mocking every second of indecision. It wasn't the first time she'd been faced with a ticking time bomb, but it was the first time with avian overlords involved. As she pondered her next move, the door slid open and admitted Lyra Solis, the ship's engineer, a genius who'd once tried to fix a warp coil with duct tape and sheer willpower. "Hey, Cap," Lyra greeted, her hands buried in her jumpsuit pockets. "Heard we're playing guest stars in the newest episode of Who Wants to Be an Alien's Pet." Vesper smirked, crossing her arms. "Yup, though I think we're more unwilling extras with no union benefits." Lyra let out a snort, plopping down beside her. "Well, if we're gonna be trophies, I'd like to be one of those with a hidden compartment and a liquor stash." Vesper chuckled, the humor more of a temporary relief than an antidote. "I'll make sure they bronze you just right." The conversation veered toward the Wormhole Temple, the big shiny attraction that had lured them like moths to a blue light bulb. The Zephyrites, for all their feathery grandeur, were tight-lipped about its function. Vesper had no illusions, something that glowing wasn't built just for show. "So, Lyra, what do you make of our glowing trap up there?" Vesper asked, nodding toward the temple visible through a window. Lyra scratched her chin, eyebrows furrowing. "Looks like it's more than just a cosmic disco ball. I'm guessing it's got something to do with their power or transport." "You know, typical alien stuff that could kill us or send us to the other end of the galaxy." "Charming," Vesper muttered. "We need to know more. Anything we can use to get out of here before we become centerpieces in a feathery banquet." Lyra leaned closer, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Actually, I was thinking of taking a little unscheduled tour. See if we can find out what's behind the curtain." Vesper raised an eyebrow. "You don't mind getting your feathers ruffled?" "I've been ruffled by worse things than aliens with delusions of grandeur," Lyra shot back, grinning. "Besides, I've been itching to see what makes that place tick." "Then let's clock in," Vesper said, feeling a semblance of hope flicker. "We'll need a distraction, though." At that moment Jax re-entered, his face the usual grim mask with a hint of what now? What are we scheming? Operation Avoid Becoming Lawn Ornaments, Vesper quipped. Lyra's got some snooping to do. Jax nodded, his mind clicking into gear. I can handle the Zephyrites. Give them a taste of human diplomacy. His dry tone suggested diplomacy would involve more sarcasm than sweet talk. They settled on a plan, a classic diversion. Jax would keep Zephyrin and his entourage occupied, while Lyra and Vesper snuck into the wormhole temple. It wasn't foolproof, but foolproof was for people who hadn't made a career out of jumping into the unknown. As they prepared, Vesper couldn't help but feel like she was back in school, cramming for an exam she didn't study for. Only this time, failure came with eternal captivity. The stakes were high, but then again, so was her tolerance for bullshit. The trio stepped out of their quarters with a newfound resolve. Jax peeled off to engage the Zephyrites, his expression suggesting he was about to deliver a masterclass in sardonic charm. Vesper and Lyra, meanwhile, slipped into the shadows, moving with the stealth of cats on a hot tin roof. The corridors of the temple seemed to twist and turn without rhyme or reason, each corner revealing another set of cryptic glyphs that glowed with an eerie light. It was like being trapped inside a kaleidoscope designed by a madman with a penchant for blue. So, Lyra, Vesper whispered as they crept along, you ever thought about a career in espionage? Only if it comes with a better dental plan, Lyra replied, her eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. You know, it's funny. My grandma used to say I'd end up in a place like this if I kept sticking my nose where it didn't belong. Well, she was right, Vesper chuckled, though the humor was tinged with anxiety. They reached the entrance to the wormhole temple, a door that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi fairy tale. Lyra went to work, her fingers flying over the control panel with the precision of a surgeon and the enthusiasm of a kid breaking into a candy store. Here goes nothing, Lyra muttered, and the door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the chamber within. The interior was a marvel of alien architecture, or a nightmare, depending on one's perspective. Strange machinery hummed with a life of its own, and a massive, swirling vortex dominated the center, its energy radiating an almost palpable force. Looks like they've got their own version of a warp drive, Lyra remarked, eyes wide. This thing could power a fleet or maybe even tear a hole in reality. Let's hope they're not planning the latter, Vesper said, eyeing the machinery with suspicion. Can you make sense of it? Give me a minute, Lyra said, already lost in the complex web of alien technology. I'll see if there's a way to shut it down or at least give us an edge. Vesper kept watch, her eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more desperate than the last. The Zephyrites' intentions were still a mystery wrapped in feathers and smugness, but Vesper had a feeling they revolved around something more sinister than mere companionship. Minutes stretched into an eternity before Lyra let out a triumphant noise. Got it. Looks like this thing isn't just a power source. It's a key. A key? Vesper asked, curiosity piqued. To what? To the wormhole, Lyra explained, her voice barely containing her excitement. It's like a gatekeeper controlling access. If we can hijack it, we might be able to use it to escape. How long to get it up and ready? Vesper pressed, adrenaline surging. Hard to say, Lyra confessed, frustration creeping in. This tech is way beyond anything I've seen. Vesper nodded, knowing they'd need more than just technical prowess to pull this off. We'll need to buy more time. Jax can only keep them distracted for so long. As if on cue, a soft chime echoed through the chamber. Vesper felt her heart skip a beat, the sound as foreboding as a death knell. We've got company, she said grimly, moving into a defensive stance. The door slid open again, revealing a group of Zephyrites, their expressions a mixture of confusion and indignation. Zephyrin stood at their head, his peacock-like feathers flaring in a display of authority. Captain Callan, what is the meaning of this intrusion? Zephyrin demanded, his voice a rumble of displeasure. Vesper flashed her best who me smile. just checking out the local attractions. It's not every day you get to see a wormhole temple up close. Zephyr's eyes narrowed, suspicion oozing from every pore. Your actions betray your words, Captain. This is a sacred place. Vesper shrugged, playing it cool despite the rising tension. Sacred, huh? Well, forgive us tourists. We just couldn't resist. You shall return to your quarters, Zephyrin commanded, his tone brooking no argument. Now, Vesper caught Lyra's eye, a silent exchange passing between them. Time was running out and they needed a new plan, one that didn't end with them as glorified mantelpieces. All right, Vesper conceded, raising her hands. We'll play nice, for now. The Zephyrites herded them back, but Vesper's mind was already racing. They had a potential key to their escape, but unlocking the door would take more than just technical know-how. It would take cunning, timing, and a fair bit of luck. Once back in their quarters, Vesper turned to Lyra, who wore a look of mixed frustration and determination. "We'll need Jax and the crew," Vesper said, her voice firm. "We've got a plan, but we'll need everyone's help to pull it off." Lyra nodded, her usual spark of mischief replaced by a resolve that burned bright. "I'll get the word out. Whatever it takes, Cap, we'll make it happen." Vesper smiled, feeling that stubborn optimism creep back in. "Damn right we will." As Lyra left to rally the crew, Vesper paced the room, her mind a whirlwind of strategies and contingencies. It wasn't the first time she'd faced impossible odds, but it was the first time with an entire alien race watching her every move. "All right, Vesper," she muttered to herself, glancing at the countdown clock that continued its relentless march. "Let's see just how clever you really are." The next 48 hours would test every skill, every ounce of nerve, and every bit of luck they had left. But Vesper Callan wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially when the alternative was a lifetime of feathery servitude. As the clock continued to tick, Vesper prepared for the fight of her life, determined to turn the tables on their would-be captors. Whatever the Zephyrites had planned, they'd soon learn that humans, for all their flaws, were nothing if not resourceful. And a resourceful human was the last thing anyone wanted as a permanent house guest. The moment Lyra slipped out to rouse the crew, Vesper took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that were tying her stomach into elaborate sailor's knots. She stood in their cramped quarters, feeling every tick of the countdown clock like it was chipping away at her sanity. Just another day in the life of Vesper Callan, space adventurer, danger magnet, and soon-to-be human trophy, if the Zephyrites had their way. The Zephyrites weren't about to let them forget who was in charge. Their feathered pals had started laying down the law with all the subtlety of a hammer to the face. Restricted movement, limited communication, and a stern reminder that humans were guests here, not that anyone needed convincing. There was a strong sense of being grounded by an avian overlord who didn't like the cut of their jib. Once Lyra returned with Jax and the rest of the crew, Vesper settled them into a huddle. The room was filled with a mix of anxiety, curiosity, and the faint odor of desperation. It was like a family reunion if your family happened to be dysfunctional and facing an existential crisis. "All right, folks, here's the score," Vesper began, her voice low but firm. "We've found a potential way out, courtesy of our feathery friends and their fancy wormhole temple, but it's not gonna be easy." Jax crossed his arms, his face a mask of grim acceptance. "Easy isn't in the job description, is it?" "Never has been," Lyra chimed in, her usual playful smirk replaced by a look of determination. "The temple's got some ancient tech we can use, but we need to get past our bird watchers." "So, we're stealing a ship or just borrowing one indefinitely?" asked Cade, a wiry navigator with a penchant for bending the rules. He'd once charted an asteroid field as a shortcut, much to the crew's immediate regret and long-term amazement. "More like hijacking a wormhole," Vesper replied, the audacity of the plan hitting her anew. "But first, we need to figure out how to operate the damn thing and make sure it doesn't send us to the wrong end of the galaxy, or into a sun, or worse." "Worse than a sun?" Cade asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Vesper shrugged. "There's always something worse. Charming, Jax muttered. And here I thought we'd just become permanent guests in their five-star aviary. Not if we can help it, Vesper assured him. But we need to be smart. The Zephyrites are on high alert, so we'll have to get creative. Creative, huh? Lyra mused. Reminds me of the time I had to fix the warp coil with duct tape and a prayer. Did it work? Vesper asked, though she knew the answer. Like a charm, Lyra said with a grin. Till it didn't, Cade chuckled. That explains a lot. The plan was simple in theory but complex as hell in execution. They'd need a distraction, something big enough to draw every Zephyrite's attention away from the temple. Jax suggested a diplomatic incident, but in the end, they settled on something a bit less likely to escalate into an interstellar war. A few hours later, the crew was scattered across the Zephyrite's territory, putting the plan into action. Jax, ever the master of sarcasm, had managed to lure a group of Zephyrite into a debate about the finer points of human cuisine. Eggs Benedict, it turned out, was a sticking point. While Jax was busy defending Earth's culinary honor, which involved more flailing arms and loud voices than Vesper had anticipated, she and Lyra slipped into the shadows, heading back to the temple. They moved quickly, heartbeats pounding like a drumline in their ears. "How's it looking?" Vesper asked as they rounded a corner, her voice barely above a whisper. Lyra glanced around, then back at Vesper. "Clear for now, but let's not push our luck." They reached the entrance again, and Lyra set to work on the control panel, her fingers a blur. The door opened once more, and they slipped inside, the familiar hum greeting them like an old friend with questionable intentions. Inside, the swirling vortex dominated the space, its energy a constant reminder of the stakes. It wasn't just a way out, it was potentially a one-way ticket to oblivion, but Vesper had never been one to shy away from bad odds. "All right," Lyra said, kneeling beside a console. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding." Vesper kept watch, her mind a jumble of thoughts and what-ifs. The Zephyrite's tech was light years ahead of anything they'd encountered, and the idea of hijacking it felt like trying to fly a starship blindfolded. But if anyone could do it, it was Lyra. "Vesper," Lyra called, breaking her train of thought. "I think I've found something." Vesper joined her, peering over her shoulder at the console. The glyphs were a jumble of symbols and lights, but Lyra pointed to a sequence that seemed to pulse with a rhythm all its own. "This is the key to controlling the wormhole," Lyra explained, her voice tinged with excitement. "We can set it to open directly to our ship, but there's a catch." "Always is," Vesper said with a sigh. "What's the damage?" "We need to synchronize it with the temple's power source," Lyra explained, gesturing to the giant vortex. "Otherwise, it's just gonna short-circuit and leave us stranded, or worse." Vesper groaned. "There's that worse again." "Sorry, Cap, but it's true," Lyra shrugged. "We need to give it a jolt, just enough to kickstart the sequence." "And how exactly do we do that?" Vesper asked, though she had a feeling she wasn't going to like the answer. "By tapping into the Zephyrite's power grid," Lyra replied. "It's risky as hell, but it's our best shot." Vesper nodded, accepting the reality of their situation. "All right. Let's do it." The atmosphere was thick with tension and a healthy dose of adrenaline. Vesper could feel her heart racing, each beat a countdown of its own. But fear was a luxury they couldn't afford, not when the clock was still ticking. With Lyra guiding her, Vesper began rerouting power from the temple's main systems, their movements synchronized like a dance of desperation. The energy pulsed through the console, lights flickering like a malfunctioning nightclub. "Almost there," Lyra muttered, her voice a mix of concentration and hope. "Just a little more." Vesper watched as the glyphs shifted, their rhythm slowing to a steady beat. It was like unlocking a puzzle box, one wrong move and it all fell apart. And then with a final surge, the console lit up in a cascade of light, the sequence complete. They'd done it. "We're in," Lyra breathed, her relief palpable. Vesper allowed herself the luxury of a grin, the weight of their achievement settling in. But they weren't out of the woods yet. Now came the hard part, getting back to the ship and activating the wormhole before the Zephyrite realized what was happening. "All right," Vesper said, steeling herself for the final push. "Let's get the hell out of here." But as they turned to leave, the door slid open, revealing Zephyrin and his entourage once more. Vesper's heart sank. They were out of time. "Captain Callan," Zephyrin intoned, his voice a rumble of displeasure. "You continue to test our patience." Vesper met his gaze head-on, her expression defiant. "Just admiring the architecture." "You know how it is." Zephyrin's eyes narrowed, suspicion etched into his features. "Your actions speak louder than your words." "Yeah, words are overrated," Vesper shot back, her tone sharp. "Especially when you're holding the wrong end of the stick." Before Zephyrin could respond, Lyra stepped forward, a sly grin spreading across her face. "You know, your security system's got more holes than Swiss cheese," she said, her voice deceptively casual. "Might want to look into that." It was a gamble, taunting them, but it bought them a precious few seconds. Seconds that Vesper and Lyra used to slip past the startled Zephyrites, sprinting down the corridor like hell itself was on their heels. The temple's corridors blurred around them, every turn a desperate bid for freedom. They could hear the Zephyrites' pursuit behind them, their cries echoing like a bad omen. "Vesper, this way," Lyra shouted, veering left down a narrow passage. Vesper followed without hesitation, trusting in her friend's instincts. They rounded a corner, the exit in sight, hope burning bright. They burst out into the open, breathless and exhilarated, only to be met by the rest of the crew, Jax at their head. His expression was one of grim determination, the kind that promised retribution for anyone who got in their way. "Took you long enough," Jax said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "We like to make an entrance," Vesper replied, her voice breathy but triumphant. With the crew assembled, they made a break for the ship, every step a race against time and the Zephyrites' wrath. Their plan was in motion, and now it was a test of wills to see who would come out on top. As they reached the ship, Lyra dashed to the control panel, fingers flying as she input the sequence they'd fought so hard to unlock. The ship hummed to life, its systems coming online with a roar that drowned out the chaos around them. "Get ready," Vesper shouted over the din, her voice carrying the weight of their desperation and resolve. The crew braced themselves as the vortex outside began to swirl, its energy a beacon of hope and danger. The wormhole was opening, a swirling maelstrom that promised escape or annihilation. "Now or never," Lyra yelled, hitting the final command. With a shudder and a lurch, the ship launched forward, propelled into the heart of the vortex. The world around them blurred into a kaleidoscope of light and sound, a whirlwind of color and chaos that defied description. But they were free. The Zephyrites' world disappeared behind them, swallowed by the wormhole's maw as the ship hurtled through the void. The sensation was one of exhilarating terror, a plunge into the unknown that left them breathless and awestruck. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The ship emerged from the other side, the familiar starscape of their own galaxy greeting them like an old friend. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd escaped. Vesper let out a whoop of triumph, the sound echoing through the ship's corridors like a victory cry. The crew joined in, laughter and relief mingling in a chorus that banished the last of their fears. Jax clapped Vesper on the back, his usual stoicism giving way to a rare smile. "Never doubted you for a second, Cap." Vesper grinned, the weight of their victory settling in. "We're not home yet, but damn, does it feel good to be back in familiar space." Lyra leaned back in her chair, exhaustion and satisfaction written across her face. "So, anyone up for Eggs Benedict when we get back?" The crew groaned in unison, the absurdity of the suggestion drawing a collective laugh. Vesper settled into her seat, the countdown clock still ticking but now a reminder of time well spent rather than time lost. They defied the odds, outsmarted their captors, and escaped with their freedom intact. And for Vesper Callan, that was more than enough for one day. The mess hall was a study in controlled chaos, or maybe just chaos. Vesper Callan sat hunched over a table that doubled as a poker table, a breakfast bar, and the occasional surgical bed. She idly toyed with a spork, her mind racing faster than a smuggler with a cargo hold full of contraband. Across from her, Jax Harper sat with his signature scowl, which could probably scare a black hole into retreat. Despite the ship's recent, shall we say, impromptu departure, his mood hadn't improved. 2 days, Jax grumbled, staring at a datapad. 2 days we've been hurtling through God knows what. I'm starting to miss the Zephyrites and their feathered fan club. Careful, Vesper replied, a smirk playing on her lips. If they hear you, they might take it as an invitation. Jax's eyes flicked up, amusement briefly cracking his granite facade. At least their idea of cuisine doesn't involve rehydrated mystery meat. Or surprise radiation poisoning, Lyra Solis chimed in, dropping into a seat with all the grace of a plummeting asteroid. She had the look of someone who'd spent too long coaxing life back into a stubborn machine. Good news is I managed to keep the warp coil from exploding. Bad news is that's not the only thing about to blow. Vesper raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. The power grid, Lyra nodded, shoving a stray lock of hair behind her ear. This ship's running on duct tape and good intentions. We're gonna need to do something about the Zephyrites if we want to keep moving. Which brings us to the million-credit question, Vesper said, leaning forward conspiratorially. How the hell do we turn their own wormhole against them? Simple, Lyra replied, flashing a grin that was more shark than engineer. We outsmart them. You remember that console we cracked? I left a little surprise in their system. Vesper leaned back, crossing her arms. I'm listening. We rigged it to trigger a feedback loop, Lyra explained. If anyone tries to meddle with the temple's settings now, it'll reroute their power straight into the vortex. Overload the system and boom, instant chaos. Instant chaos, huh? Jax snorted. Our specialty. Hey, it beats getting feathered, Cade piped up from the corner where he was messing with a star map. And by feathered, I mean skewered with whatever talons they happen to have on board. Speaking of which, Vesper interrupted, looking around. What's our Zephyrite surveillance situation? Still breathing down our necks, Jax answered dryly. They've been sending friendly check-ins every couple of hours. I swear if one more feathered face shows up on my screen acting like this is a diplomatic visit, I'm gonna lose it, Vesper chuckled. Diplomatic visit? I'd say we're more like the uninvited guests who won't leave. And we're definitely overstaying our welcome, Lyra said. Those temple settings are a ticking bomb. We either detonate it on our terms or risk them figuring it out and, well, you know, us becoming space dust. Lovely, Jax muttered. Space dust with a side of fried human. All right, Vesper said, tapping the table with a newfound urgency. We've got to escalate our plans. If the Zephyrites are getting suspicious, we need to move before they decide we're more trouble than we're worth. Already on it, Lyra assured, pulling a small device from her pocket. I've got a signal scrambler ready. It'll buy us enough time to initiate the feedback loop without them knowing what hit them. Cade, I'll need you on navigation to make sure we don't end up in the middle of a star. Don't worry, Cade replied, flashing a devil-may-care grin. I'm more into bending the rules, not physics. Vesper shook her head, half amused, half resigned. All right, let's get to it. Jax, keep the Zephyrites busy. If they get too nosy, charm them with your winning personality. Jax rolled his eyes but stood up, tugging at his jacket like a warrior donning his armor. They are in for a treat then. The crew dispersed with purpose, the weight of their gamble pressing down like the oppressive silence of space. Vesper could feel the tension in the air, as palpable as the hum of the ship's engines. As they made their way to the control room, Vesper couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. Her crew was a motley collection of misfits, but they were her misfits, and damn if they weren't capable of pulling off the impossible. How long do you think we have? Vesper asked as they reached the bridge, the ship's lights casting long shadows in the dim space. Lyra shrugged, pulling up a series of schematics on the main console. If we're lucky, 10 minutes. If we're not, less than 5. Good to know, Vesper replied dryly. Let's aim for lucky, shall we? The ship was a flurry of activity as they set their plan in motion. Cade manned the navigation, fingers dancing over the console with a dexterity that spoke of years spent dodging both bounty hunters and boredom. "Ready when you are," Cade announced, his voice steady despite the impending madness. "Lyra, initiate the scramble," Vesper ordered, eyes fixed on the viewport where the wormhole loomed like a gaping maw. "Scrambler is go," Lyra confirmed, pressing a button with a decisive click. "We're officially off the grid." "All right, people," Vesper said, her voice carrying through the bridge. "Let's see if we can make a mess big enough to cover our escape." The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness, each moment a precarious tightrope walk between triumph and disaster. The ship hummed with a low, threatening growl, the hull vibrating as if anticipating the coming storm. "Feedback loop is stable," Lyra announced, eyes glued to the console. "We're starting to see the power shift." "Good," Vesper replied, her voice a calm anchor amidst the chaos. "Cade, get us a trajectory. I don't fancy becoming the galaxy's newest fireworks display." "Already plotting," Cade assured, his eyes focused. "Just keep us steady." Vesper turned her attention to the main display, a bead of sweat trickling down her temple. The Zephyrite's technology was a marvel, and she couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for their craft. It was a pity they had to use it against them. Just then, the comm crackled to life, and Jax's voice cut through the tension. "We've got company," he reported, annoyance lacing his words. "Zephyr's on the line and he's not buying our story." "Stall him," Vesper instructed, even as a thrill of fear coursed through her veins. "We need more time." "Doing my best," Jax replied, the sound of his voice like a lifeline in the storm. The ship shuddered, a low groan reverberating through the bulkheads as the wormhole began to react to their meddling. A maelstrom of energy swirled outside, a deadly dance that promised both salvation and obliteration. "Vesper, we're reaching critical levels," Lyra warned, her voice steady but urgent. "If we don't move now, we're toast." "All right," Vesper said, taking a deep breath. "Cade, punch it. Get us the hell out of here." The ship lurched as Cade engaged the drive, propelling them forward with a force that pressed them into their seats. The wormhole loomed ahead, its chaotic beauty both terrifying and mesmerizing. Time seemed to stretch, the universe holding its breath as they raced toward their uncertain fate. Every instinct screamed at Vesper to abort, to pull back, but she ignored them all, trusting in her crew and their devil-may-care brilliance. And then they were through, the wormhole closing behind them with a finality that sent a shiver down her spine. The ship steadied, the hum of its engines a comforting reminder of their continued existence. "We did it," Lyra breathed, relief etching her features. "We're clear." Vesper let out a shaky laugh, the tension dissolving in the aftermath of their mad dash. "You know, for a second there, I thought we were goners." "Me too," Cade admitted, a grin tugging at his lips. "But damn, what a ride." Jax's voice came through the calm, a grudging respect in his tone. "Nice work, team. Now let's put as much space between us and that feathered nightmare as possible." Aye," Vesper replied, settling back into her chair. "And next time someone asks if we'd like to explore ancient alien tech, remind me to say no." "Somehow, I doubt you'll keep that promise," Lyra teased, the tension in her shoulders easing. "No promises," Vesper agreed, grinning as she surveyed her crew. They may have been a ragtag bunch of outcasts, but they were hers. And together they'd face down the abyss and come out on the other side, bruised but unbroken. As the stars stretched out before them, a universe of possibilities waiting to be explored, Vesper Callan knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, they were ready. The mood on the bridge had swung from tentative relief to uneasy anticipation. The kind of calm that precedes a storm, where everyone knows they are in the eye of something goddamn awful. Vesper Callan sat back in her chair, feeling the creeping unease that always came when things seemed too easy. She'd seen it before, and it never ended with a nice vacation and fruity drinks. More like a quick execution and a shallow grave. "You know, I was just getting comfortable with the idea of not being vaporized," Jax Harper grumbled, thumbing through his datapad of doom. "Now I've got a new hobby, waiting for the Zephyrites to swoop in and end it all. Always did like collecting rare experiences, Cade quipped from the navigation seat. Being captured by bird people. That'll really look good on the I'll resume, Vesper snorted. Beats dying of boredom. Barely, Lyra Solis was hunched over the main console, her fingers moving with the kind of mechanical precision that only came after years of coaxing life back into things that should have stayed dead. I could use a break from keeping these scraps together, she sighed. You guys realize if the Zephyrites don't kill us, this ship will. Pep talk of the year, Lyra, Jax said dryly. Remind me to never hire you for motivational speeches. The ship shuddered, a groaning protest that reminded everyone aboard of its rickety state. Vesper sat forward, eyes narrowing. Something's not right. Cade checked the scanners. Cade's fingers flew across the controls. Looks like we've got some unwanted company, he said, his voice taking on a sudden edge. Multiple signatures closing in on us fast. Jax grimaced. Guess the Zephyrites missed us. How touching. Lyra snapped upright, eyes darting. We can't outrun them, not with this heap. We need a plan. Vesper echoed, a mocking lilt to her voice. I was hoping for a miracle. Stick around, Cade murmured. I'm sure something will explode soon. The comm crackled to life, blasting a wave of static before a voice broke through, clipped, authoritative, and unmistakably Zephyrite. Human vessel, stand down and prepare for boarding. Vesper leaned back, her expression one of cheery defiance. Well, isn't this a fine mess? Jax rolled his eyes. We've been in worse. Yeah, Vesper said dryly. Like that time you tried to charm the bounty hunter with your winning personality. Hey, Jax protested. That was a tactical error. Lyra laughed. You got us thrown into a penal colony for a month. Vesper raised a hand, cutting through the bickering. Focus, people. If we're gonna get out of this, we need to think. The ship shuddered again, this time with a juddering tremor that sent tools clattering across the floor. I've got a feeling they're not here to negotiate, Cade said, his voice grim. They never are, Vesper replied, a bitter twist to her words. Screw it. Let's see what they want. Moments later, they were lined up in the cramped corridor as Zephyrite forces marched through the ship. Tall, lithe creatures with plumage that was more intimidating than decorative. They moved with the kind of grace that comes from being the undisputed top of the food chain. Vesper watched them approach, her mind racing through possibilities. There were always ways out, if you were willing to pay the price. And she was no stranger to steep costs. The Zephyrite commander fluffed its feathers, a gesture that might have been intimidation or just preening. You have violated the terms of your stay. Violated. Vesper echoed, all wide-eyed innocence. I thought we were just bending them a little. The commander's gaze was unreadable. You have tampered with sacred technology. Vesper shrugged. What can I say? Curiosity killed the cat. But satisfaction brought it back. Though I guess you're not much for cats. Enough, the commander snapped with a wave of its hand. Vesper and her crew were quickly surrounded, herding them like unruly cattle. You will come with us. Jax grumbled as they were led away. I knew we shouldn't have trusted a place that serves alien eggs Benedict. Vesper managed a grin. Complaining about the menu now, Jax. Hey, I'm just saying, Jax said. Last time I ate something with feathers, it didn't end well. As they were marched through the bowels of the ship and onto a Zephyrite vessel, Vesper caught Lyra's eye. The engineer gave a small nod, a silent confirmation that the game wasn't over. Not yet. They were led into a holding cell, all sterile metal and humming force fields. The Zephyrite overseeing them was a young one, its feathers a vivid hue that suggested inexperience. Vesper filed that away for later. Young meant easier to manipulate. The door slid shut with a finality that made even Cade's endless optimism falter. He slumped against the wall, his usual irreverence dimmed. Well, he said, this sucks. Vesper leaned against the opposite wall, her mind a storm of half-formed plans and discarded hopes. I've had worse first dates, she muttered. Yeah, Lyra said, but did they end up with you locked in a cage? Only the good ones, Vesper said, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ior's passed, the silence punctuated only by their own sarcasm and the distant hum of alien machinery. Vesper found herself staring at the countdown clock, its rhythmic tick a reminder of their dwindling time. And then, finally, there was movement. The door slid open and a Zephyrite entered, a different one this time. Older, its feathers duller, worn with experience. It regarded them with an intensity that made Vesper shift uncomfortably. "You are fortunate," it said, its voice a low melody of disapproval. "I have taken an interest in your plight." "And what a plight it is," Jax muttered under his breath. "Tell me, do you take a personal interest in all your prisoners, or are we just special?" The Zephyrite ignored the jibe, focusing on Vesper. "You seek freedom. Last time I checked, yeah," Vesper replied. "Isn't that what everyone wants? There are those who believe your kind should be given the opportunity to prove their worth," the Zephyrite said, its eyes narrowing slightly. "Even if it means bending the rules." Lyra perked up, sensing a sliver of hope. "Bending rules? Now you're speaking our language." The Zephyrite tilted its head, an avian gesture that spoke of curiosity. "You have disrupted the natural order, yet you intrigue me. It is rare to find such. Tenacity, huh?" Cade said, his voice a mix of defiance and disbelief. "Most people call it stupidity." The Zephyrite's gaze softened, just a fraction, perhaps. "But stupidity can inspire change." Vesper straightened, her instincts telling her there was more at play here. "You're not just here for friendly conversation, are you?" "No," the Zephyrite admitted. "I am here because I believe in the potential of your species. A belief that is not shared by all." "Well, it's nice to have a fan," Jax said, his sarcasm poorly masking genuine surprise. "Consider this your opportunity," the Zephyrite continued. "You will be released, but you must agree to leave our space and never return." Vesper's mind whirred, weighing trust against desperation. "And what's the catch?" "The catch," the Zephyrite said, "is that you will owe a favor. A small price for your lives." Vesper exchanged a glance with her crew, reading the same mixture of skepticism and hope etched into their expressions. It wasn't an ideal situation, but it was a path forward, one they sorely needed. "Deal," Vesper said, sealing their fate with a single word. "But just so we're clear, if this goes south, we're not above renegotiating." The Zephyrite inclined its head, a gesture of agreement, or perhaps amusement. "Your defiance is noted." With that, the barriers deactivated and the door swung open. They were free for now. As they were escorted back to their ship, the gravity of their situation settled in, a new alliance brokered in the shadow of mutual necessity. "Well, that was unexpected," Lyra said, her tone a mix of relief and wariness. Vesper nodded, her mind already racing ahead. "Unexpected, sure. But now we've got a shot. Who knew playing nice with the feathered folk would pay off?" Cade said, shaking his head. Jax snorted. "Let's just hope our new friend doesn't change their mind." The crew settled back into the familiar chaos of their ship, their spirits lifted just enough to edge out the ever-present threat of doom. As the stars once again stretched out before them, Vesper couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was a capricious beast. It gave, it took, and sometimes, if you were lucky enough, it gave again, but always with strings attached. But for now, they had their lives, their freedom, and a promise of a future beyond the reach of their captors. And that, in the grand scheme of things, was worth cherishing. "All right, let's get the hell out of here," Vesper said, her voice firm with resolve. "And remind me not to sign up for any more diplomatic missions." Her crew laughed, their camaraderie a comforting balm against the backdrop of uncertainty. The future was as treacherous as ever, but Vesper had her crew, her ship, and a flicker of hope. And in the vast expanse of space, that was sometimes all you needed. The Zephyrite craft disembarked them into their ship without the pomp and circumstance usually reserved for unexpected pardons. No farewell parade or complimentary feather plucking, just a quick soft shoe shuffle back into the familiar corridors smelling of stale sweat and impending doom. The crew gathered in the mess hall, a place of perpetual chaos where food and arguments both simmered with equal fervor. It was time to digest more than just the alien eggs Benedict that had apparently sealed their fate. Vesper leaned over the table, their makeshift war room, and tapped the datapad with a finger. "All right, kids, Let's talk about that little favor we owe our feathered friends." Her grin was all teeth, as if daring the universe to throw another curveball. Jax rolled his eyes, his own datapad slung under his arm like a reluctant pet. "Nothing good ever starts with 'let's talk about that favor we owe,'" he grumbled. "Oh, come on, it's like a space credit card," Lyra quipped, adjusting her seat as she fiddled with a wrench. "We'll just make minimum payments until we can skedaddle out of their reach." Cade, fingers still twitching from the adrenaline of their release, chimed in. "So, what's the play?" "We fly back home, pretend the Zephyrites don't exist, and hope they don't come knocking for their pound of flesh." Vesper shook her head, her smile fading into something more serious. "There's a catch, though. They didn't just let us go because of our winning personalities. We've got to do something about that temple." The mention of the temple drew a collective groan from the crew. That glowing structure had been the bait they'd bitten on when they ventured into Zephyrite space, as enticing and potentially lethal as a Venus flytrap. "Temple, schmemple," Jax said, leaning back and folding his arms. "They want us to play janitor for their broken toys." "Not quite," Vesper said. Our friend with the dusty feathers dropped a hint. "That temple tech. It's powerful, old, and they've got no damn clue how to use it." "But we do." Lyra perked up, a sparkle in her eye that usually meant trouble with a side of accidental genius. "Oh, that's cute. Centuries-old alien tech, and they hand it to us like it's IKEA furniture." Vesper waved a hand dismissively. "Which means if we're smart about it, we can rig this temple's power to create a singularity, enough to knock out their control systems. We risk everything, but what else is new?" Silence settled like dust in the room, each of them pondering the insanity of the plan. Risking everything was a game they'd played before, but this time the stakes were higher than Jax's cholesterol. Cade broke the quiet first, his voice a low rumble. "So, we're basically planning to blow up their tech in their own backyard, and hope it doesn't take us with it." "Pretty much," Vesper said, nodding. "But given our track record, what could possibly go wrong, right? We all know how much the universe loves us," Jax muttered. "But hey, I'm in. Got nothing better to do today than create a black hole," Lyra snorted. "I was planning to clean the engine room, but this sounds way more fun." Their laughter was tinged with that particular brand of gallows humor only those facing immediate annihilation could muster. This was, after all, a crew whose idea of a safe bet was juggling grenades with the pins pulled. With a collective shrug that said more about their acceptance of insanity than any words could, they began to plan. Schematics were pulled up. Ideas, half-baked and fully reckless, were tossed around like the ingredients of a disaster pie. Vesper's eyes were alight with the kind of manic determination that always preceded their most harebrained schemes. "All right, Lyra, you're our tech whisperer. Figure out how to talk to this ancient junk and make it sing our tune." She gave a mock salute, already halfway out of her seat. "I'll see what I can do." No promises on the singing, but maybe some tap dancing. Jax and Cade exchanged glances, the kind that said they'd follow Vesper into the abyss, and likely would again. "And us?" Cade asked, folding his arms over his chest. "You boys get to play defense." Vesper flashed them a grin, all teeth and no fear. "Make sure nobody interrupts our little performance." Jax nodded, already feeling the familiar weight of inevitability settle in. "Let's break some eggs, then." With the plan drafted with all the careful consideration of a toddler with crayons, they set to work. They'd faced worse odds, after all, though one would be hard-pressed to remember exactly when. As the old ship creaked its way toward the wormhole temple, its engines complaining with every parsec, Vesper couldn't help but think about what lay ahead. They'd managed to get out of their fair share of scrapes before, but this time the stakes were different. This time, they weren't just running from trouble, they were running straight into it. It wasn't long before the temple loomed before them, a structure of daunting beauty and ancient menace. The lights flickered with an ominous glow, like the universe's version of mood lighting set to impending doom. "All right, team," Vesper said, standing at the helm and looking out at the glowing edifice. "We're on." Lyra was already neck-deep in alien circuitry, her hands moving with a precision born of years of making sense of nonsensical systems. I've got access to some of the controls. This stuff's older than Jax's taste in music, but I think I can coax it into working. Hey, Jax retorted, sifting through the ship's weapons cache. My music taste is classic. Like fine wine or that smell in old libraries. Yeah, musty and overwhelming, Cade added, his voice full of mock sympathy. Vesper shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips despite herself. Focus, children. We've got a singularity to whip up. For all their bluster and bravado, the crew worked in sync, moving with a practiced efficiency that belied their constant bickering. It was like watching a dysfunctional symphony where every note was a potential disaster waiting to happen. Lyra was in her element, coaxing the alien tech to life with a mixture of brute force and subtlety, a delicate dance of destruction. She managed to reroute power from the temple's core, her fingers flying across controls that weren't meant for human hands. "So we're really doing this?" Jax asked, casting a wary glance at the steadily ticking countdown. "Creating a singularity just to screw up their day. Why not?" Lyra said with a shrug. "We're overdue for a little cosmic chaos." Vesper checked the ship systems, the countdown clock now an ever-present reminder of how little time they had left. "Lyra, any chance you can make this thing sing before we're all star dust?" "Don't rush me, Captain," Lyra called back, brow furrowed in concentration. "Good things take time, and destructive things, well, they take slightly longer," Cade finished, his grip tightening on the controls. "I just hope this doesn't end with us as a smear on the cosmic windshield." "Look on the bright side," Vesper said. "If it fails, we won't be around to complain." "Always a silver lining," Jax muttered. Time, slippery as always, ticked down inexorably. The moments stretched and compressed, each second a lifetime as Lyra cajoled the ancient technology into compliance. "Almost there," she murmured, her voice a mix of excitement and tension. Just a few more adjustments, the ancient mechanisms hummed, a sound that reverberated through the ship and into their bones, a symphony of impending doom wrapped up in alien engineering. Vesper's eyes were fixed on the readouts, her mind balancing on the knife's edge of hope and fear. "Cade, get ready. We're gonna need a quick getaway." Cade's fingers danced over the controls, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Good thing we're experts at running away. And here I thought we were just experts at getting caught," Jax said with a wry grin, checking the weapon systems one last time. With a final flourish that would have put a conductor to shame, Lyra slapped the console. "Done. We've got a singularity primed and ready." A ripple of tension rolled through the crew, anticipation mixed with the thrill of having their backs against the wall. The temple's glow shifted, an eerie light that promised more than it delivered, a beacon leading them straight into chaos. "Here we go," Vesper said, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. "Let's hope this works." The ship surged forward, engines screaming in protest as they raced to get clear of the temple's reach. The singularity bloomed behind them, a maelstrom of power and possibility that danced across the cosmos with all the grace of a drunken swan. Vesper held her breath as they sped away, eyes glued to the rear monitors. The singularity expanded, a ravenous maw that swallowed the temple's systems in one bite. Zephyrite crafts, unprepared for such a feat of human audacity, flickered and died, their control systems overwhelmed. "Is it working?" Jax shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of their escape. Lyra's eyes were wide with awe, her fingers still hovering over the controls. "I think so. We've thrown a massive wrench into their works," Cade whooped, the sound echoing through the ship like a victory cry. "We did it," the ship shuddered. The singularities pull a relentless force that threatened to drag them back into the abyss. But the engines held, just barely, propelling them toward open space and away from the chaos they'd ignited. "Hold on," Vesper shouted, the ship lurching beneath them as they broke free of the gravitational grip. With one final push, the ship soared past the event horizon of their own making, leaving behind a scene of destruction and disarray, a testament to the human knack for survival and subversion. They were free, for now. As the ship settled into the relative calm of space, the crew allowed themselves a moment of quiet, of breathless victory. They'd done it, against all odds and reason. Well, Vesper said, her voice a mixture of relief and exhaustion. That was a ride. Jax leaned back, a wry smile on his face. I'd say let's not do that again, but who am I kidding? Cade chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. Yeah, we seem to have a habit of poking the bear, or in this case the bird. Lyra grinned, the adrenaline high still lingering. Next time, let's try sabotaging something a little less likely to implode. Yeah. Vesper shook her head, her smile tired but genuine. Where's the fun in that? As the stars stretched out before them, the crew of the rickety old ship settled back into the familiar chaos of their existence. It was a life on the edge, full of danger, uncertainty, and the occasional mad dash for survival. And despite everything, they wouldn't have it any other way. As the singularity bloomed behind them, the ship rattled like a can full of angry marbles, each one screaming existential dread. Every panel vibrated, each light flickered. It felt like the universe itself was having a particularly bad day and decided to take it out on them. Vesper stood at the helm, grit in her teeth, determined to get them through this self-made chaos. Anyone else find it cute how the universe tries to kill us on a regular basis? Vesper asked, fingers dancing on the controls, trying to keep the ship from becoming a permanent part of the cosmic backdrop. Adorable, Jax replied, clutching his datapad like it was a stress ball. I'd almost feel flattered if it didn't want me dead. Lyra was knee-deep in alien circuitry, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. I think we've pissed off the wrong intergalactic birdwatchers this time. Relax, Lyra. They'll just think it's another Tuesday, Cade said, his hands steady on the controls as he steered them through the gauntlet of gravitational squalls. They'll get over it. Or, explode. Optimism, thy name is Cade. Lyra managed a grin, even as she fought to keep the ancient tech singing the right tune, a feat akin to convincing a rock concert to turn into a ballet. The wormhole temple, caught in the grip of the singularity, shuddered and groaned. Lights flickered, ancient systems sparking like the universe was having a light show. Zephyrite crafts, designed for elegance rather than resilience, spiraled out of control, caught in their own web of technology gone haywire. Time to blow this joint, Vesper shouted over the din, her eyes locked on the swirling more ahead. The wormhole was their ticket out, their only chance at slipping the noose they'd placed so artfully around their own necks. Jax's fingers flew over his datapad with the desperation of a man trying to find a lost save file in a video game. Coordinates locked. Ready when you are, Vesper took a breath. All right, let's show these feathered freaks how humans do it. The ship lurched forward, engines howling in protest, metal groaning around them. It was like piloting a spaceship made of angry bees, all sting, no structure. The wormhole yawned wide, a gaping mouth ready to swallow them whole and spit them out Lord knows where. Full speed ahead, Vesper called, grinning like a maniac who just discovered a new way to break the laws of physics. No one had time to respond before they were plunged into the swirling chaos of the wormhole. Colors blurred past them, every hue screaming a different kind of insanity. For a moment time seemed to distort and compress, past and present colliding in a kaleidoscope of cosmic confusion. Cade whooped, a sound of pure, reckless joy. It's like a carnival ride, only we might die. I hate carnival rides, Jax grumbled, gripping his datapad for dear life. I get nauseous. Lyra snorted, still fiddling with her console. Well, you're in luck. No vomiting in zero gravity. As they tumbled through the wormhole, Vesper's mind whirled with possibilities. It was all or nothing, a desperate gamble to slip the Zephyrite's grasp and live to screw up another day. Just the way she liked it. The ship shuddered violently, reality snapping back into focus with all the subtlety of a fired cannonball. They were out, the wormhole spitting them into the relative calm of open space. Behind them, the singularity continued its ravenous work, the temple and its Zephyrite keepers caught in a dance of destruction. For a moment, silence reigned, the ship settling into the quiet hum of systems struggling to keep them alive. Vesper let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "We made it," she said, almost to herself. Jax, pale but grinning, nodded. "Bet those Zephyrites are rethinking their guest policy." Cade gave a low whistle. "I'll say. We really kicked the hornet's nest this time." Lyra leaned back in her seat, exhaustion catching up with her, and lived to tell the tale. "Here's to next time." "Next time," Vesper echoed with a wry smile. The thrill of surviving another impossible situation coursed through her veins, a drug she'd never willingly quit. The ship, battered and weary, continued its course through the stars. They'd done it, thrown a wrench into the Zephyrite's plans and come out on the other side, relatively unscathed. "Let's just hope they're reconsidering their stance on humans after that," Vesper said, checking their systems for any lingering damage. "Hope so," Jax replied, his voice tinged with humor and relief. "Otherwise we'll be in for one hell of a round two," Lyra chuckled, waving a wrench like a victory banner. "Round 2, 3, 4. Bring it on." As the stars stretched out before them, endless and inviting, Vesper allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The universe was vast and dangerous, but they'd proven they could hold their own. Against all odds, they'd turned the tables, shown the Zephyrites that humanity was more than just a minor annoyance. "All right, team," Vesper said, her voice confident and steady. "Let's find somewhere to lay low, patch ourselves up, and figure out our next move." Cade nodded, setting a course for the nearest safe haven, which in their line of work was usually anything not actively trying to kill them. "Lay low, sure. But let's not make it a habit." "Wouldn't dream of it," Vesper replied, her grin all teeth and daring. As they sailed through the stars, the crew settled back into their routine of banter and bickering, adrenaline slowly fading to a more manageable level. They'd won the day, a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough to keep them going. And somewhere, back in the chaos they'd left behind, the Zephyrite were surely reconsidering just how dangerous these pesky humans could be. And maybe, just maybe, they'd think twice before underestimating them again. The ship's engines thrummed a steady beat, a lullaby for weary travelers. Vesper leaned back in her seat, staring out at the endless expanse before them. "Here's to the unknown," she murmured, "a toast to the stars." "Here's to us," Jax added, raising an imaginary glass. "To us," Lyra and Cade echoed, their voices a harmonious blend of camaraderie and defiance. Together they sailed onward, toward whatever chaos the universe had in store for them next. Because in the end they were human, flawed, irreverent, and endlessly stubborn. And that, as always, made all the difference. The ship sailed through space, the stars a glittering backdrop to the barely holding it together vessel. Vesper leaned back in the pilot's seat, exhaling a long breath she'd been holding ever since the wormhole spat them out. The universe, for once, decided to give them a breather, probably saving its energy for the next attempt on their lives. "Well," Vesper said, breaking the silence, "that was a nice little jaunt through hell, wasn't it?" Jax glanced up from his datapad, a sardonic twist to his lips. "Oh, sure. Just like a Sunday picnic, if your idea of a picnic involves near-death experiences and existential crises. Don't forget the feathered overlords," Lyra added, still perched on the floor amidst a pile of alien tech like some mythical creature with a death wish for circuitry. "Really adds to the charm." Cade, hands still steady on the controls, shrugged. "I'd say it adds character. Nothing like a bit of intergalactic lunacy to keep things interesting." The crew chuckled, a shared moment of gallows humor brightening the dim glow of the cockpit. Gallows being the operative word, especially since the Zephyrite were probably contemplating whether humans were more trouble than they were worth. Which, if they had any sense, they'd conclude with a resounding yes. Vesper flicked a few switches, eyeing the ship's systems. Most lights were green, a color she hadn't seen in a while and wasn't entirely sure she trusted. "All systems go, or at least limping along." "Lyra, remind me to give you a medal or maybe just a sandwich for keeping the warp coil from going kaboom." Lyra laughed, shoving a stray wire back into a panel with more force than necessary. I'll take the sandwich. Medals are for people who survive long enough to show them off. Fair point, Vesper replied, a smirk tugging at her lips. But hey, we survived, again. Jax tapped a few buttons on his datapad, frowning. Yeah, but we might be on borrowed time. Zephyrites aren't exactly known for their forgiving nature. Maybe we did them a favor, Cade suggested, as if trying to convince himself as much as the others. Showed them some of their flaws, a bit of cosmic tough love. Yeah, nothing says love like wrecking their temple and nearly getting them all killed, Jax deadpanned. Real hallmark of friendship. Come on, Jax, Vesper teased, we're like the universe's favorite bad penny. We keep showing up and eventually they'll love us for it, more like tolerate us, Lyra corrected, though her tone was light. But hey, if they want to send us a thank you card, I won't argue. They shared another laugh, the kind that came from the edges of sanity, pushed there by too many close calls and not enough good luck. Still, the mood in the cockpit was one of cautious optimism, as if surviving the latest chaos had somehow tilted the scales in their favor. Vesper leaned back, letting the hum of the engine settle into her bones. All right, team. Let's figure out where we're going before the universe changes its mind and decides to finish the job. Cade nodded, punching coordinates into the navigation. There's a refueling station a few light years out. It's remote enough that the Zephyrites shouldn't bother us there. Perfect, Vesper said, her eyes flicking to the endless void outside. We can lay low, patch ourselves up, and maybe come up with a plan that doesn't involve pissing off an entire alien race. Good luck with that, Jax chimed in, waving his datapad like a wand. I'm pretty sure it's in our DNA to annoy everything we encounter. True, Lyra said, her grin mischievous. But look how far it's gotten us. The crew settled into a comfortable silence, each lost in their thoughts as the ship hurtled through space. They'd made it out, but the implications of their actions lingered like a bad smell. The Zephyrites were a formidable force, and they'd just given them a reason to pay attention. But amid the lingering tension, there was a sense of resolve. They'd faced worse, and they'd face whatever came next with the same reckless abandon that had kept them alive this long. As they neared their destination, the ship's comms crackled to life, a familiar voice breaking through the static. This is Zephyrite Ambassador Nuru to the human vessel, requesting permission to dock. Vesper's brow arched, surprise coloring her features. Well, that's new. Did we just get a call from someone with feathers? Looks like it, Jax replied, tapping the comms to respond. Permission granted, Ambassador. Though I'd keep your expectations low. Our hospitality is more survivor camp than five-star resort. The comms went silent, and a few moments later, a sleek Zephyrite craft docked with their ship, its design elegant and deceptively fragile. Out stepped Ambassador Nuru, their form tall and willowy, feathers catching the ship's dim light. Vesper stood, meeting the ambassador with a nod. Welcome aboard, Nuru. What can we do for you? Nuru inclined their head, the gesture graceful. I come bearing a message from the Zephyrite Council. They wish to open a dialogue to understand your people better. 2. Learn from your resilience and adaptability, Jax snorted, crossing his arms. Resilience and adaptability. Is that what they're calling it now? Nuru's eyes glinted with humor, a rare sight. Indeed. You have shown us that humanity is more than a curious anomaly. There is much we can learn from you and perhaps much you can learn from us. The crew exchanged glances, the weight of Nuru's words sinking in. They'd never expected this, a chance to bridge the gap between species, to move beyond the cycle of conflict and misunderstanding. Well, Vesper said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Looks like we might have started something here. A new chapter, maybe. Cade nodded, his expression thoughtful. Might not be such a bad thing. We could use a few friends in the universe. Nuru's feathers fluttered, a sign of agreement. Together we can build a future not of subjugation but of mutual respect. Lyra grinned, leaning forward. Looks like we've got some diplomacy to do then. Not exactly our forte, but hey, we've pulled off crazier stunts. Vesper turned to Nuru, her voice steady and sincere. We're willing to give it a shot, Nuru. If the Zephyrites are open to it, so are we. Nuru nodded, their gaze steady. Then let us begin this journey together. May it lead to a greater understanding between our peoples. With a new purpose, the crew settled back into their roles, the ship humming with a newfound energy. They'd survived the chaos, and now they had the chance to shape what came next. As they sailed through the stars, the weight of possibility hung in the air, a promise of what could be achieved when two stubborn species decided to stop butting heads and start working together. "Here's to the unknown," Vesper murmured, "a toast to new beginnings." "To us," Jax added, raising an imaginary glass. "To the future," Lyra and Cade chimed in, their voices a harmonious blend of hope and determination. Together they sailed onward, toward whatever the universe had in store. Because in the end they were human, flawed, irreverent, and endlessly stubborn. And that, as always, made all the difference.